It's going to be a fascinating watch, not just to see if the DUP goes back into Stormont, but if it does, can it keep the party machine on the road?
We are the custodians of Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. On our shoulders rests a huge responsibility.
Our panel of guests will share their thoughts on what they think happens next, plus two of the big talking points while we all wait for the DUP reforming Stormont and attitudes on the island towards union or unity. We'll get the thoughts of one leading expert. Hello, we saw a side to the DUP leader yesterday that we haven't seen very often before. But to what end? Does it hint strongly, as many have suggested, at his party's unfolding direction of travel? And if it does, how will that play within the wider unionist landscape? That's what I'll be discussing with my panel in just a moment, after this reminder of Sir Geoffrey's performance in the Chamber.
My party can stand over its record of the change we have delivered and will deliver. And I say to those who point the finger at us, what have you delivered? What has the traditional Unionist Voice party delivered by way of change to the protocol? Absolutely nothing. There are some who don't want Stormont back, who don't want an assembly in Northern Ireland, who, and I quote, would rather have imperfect direct rule than an imperfect Stormont. That is what they say. And yet they're the same people who berate the government of the United Kingdom and this Parliament for selling them out. When we took the decision to come out of the institutions, it was about the protocol. It's about restoring Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom and its internal market. We have fought hard and will continue to fight hard to get the outcomes that we need for everyone in Northern Ireland, to restore that cross-community consensus that is essential for the proper functioning of our devolved institutions in Northern Ireland. The notion that a unionism that turns in on itself is a unionism that can deliver for Northern Ireland, to make Northern Ireland work, to secure the union for the future is not the way to go.
Just a flavour of what the DUP leader had to say in the Commons yesterday. Let's pick up on that with my panel. The former DUP Special Advisor David Graham, the commentator Sarah Crichton, and we're also joined by the writer and historian Dr Aaron Edwards, who teaches at Sandhurst. We did ask the Secretary of State to join us tonight, but he declined. We also invited senior members of the DUP to take part, every member of the party officer team, in fact, but again, there's no one here. But thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. That clip of Sir Geoffrey was from yesterday, as I mentioned, and since then, and I need to mention this, we've had a report that the government intends to limit the UK's divergence away from EU rules in the hope that the Irish Sea border will fade away enough to get the DUP to go back to Stormont, though the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, is planning to challenge the Prime Minister on that, according to the Daily Telegraph tonight. The plot thickens. We'll discuss the electoral challenges accepting a deal could throw up for the DUP in a moment. But first, David Graham, is Sir Geoffrey manoeuvring his party into the place where he has the best chance of getting this, whatever it is, across the line?
Well, look, I think he's got a lot of work on his hands. Certainly, suggestions are that the best he can hope for is to get a 7-5 win. And, there is an irony here, Mark, isn't there, where he probably feels in a similar position to where the late Lord Trimble felt at a time when Geoffrey actually defected to the DUP. And I remember, David Trimble always said, well, look, I only need 50% plus one to get whatever deal or vote through at his executive level. But, you left 49% unhappy and discontent, the Arlene Fosters, the Geoffrey Donaldsons of this world. So Geoffrey will be acutely aware of that. And he will also be acutely aware that those who are certainly suggested to be opposed to the bill, to the deal, are big hitters in the DUP who are, party veterans, someone like Lord Dodds, someone like Lord Morrow. So, look, if reports are suggesting that they are opposing the deal, Geoffrey has a lot of work on his hands.
He may also have a lot of work on his hands if Brexiteers in the Cabinet and on the backbenches in the Commons are not happy with the shape of this deal or how they think it's maybe shaping up. if he wants to go for this and he thinks he's got the best deal he can get, he needs to move pretty quickly, because if Kemi Badenoch is challenging the Prime Minister, this could all unravel before he signs on the dotted line.
I don't think any of us probably saw that coming, Mark. And I know we're talking off air to say this is left field. And, I think that the British government have not been helpful to unionists in particular over perhaps maybe ever, but certainly in the last number of weeks and months. And I think Chris Heaton-Harris, in his own way, has probably played this quite well, because certainly the pressure on the DUP has risen greatly. Not so much from the party base, to be honest, but certainly from the media and the wider body politic in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, well, he certainly made it clear yesterday, didn't he, in the House, that he thinks he's doing all the heavy lifting and he's not maybe getting the help from some people that he thinks he deserves. The Daily Telegraph stories are stories from the Daily Telegraph, which obviously comes from a very particular place as far as the Conservative Party is concerned. But, I mean, what do you make of the idea that if Sir Geoffrey, likes this deal, he'd better sign up quickly before Kemi Badenoch and others in the ERG perhaps get to work and it falls apart?
He should sign up quickly, but I think we need to acknowledge, I mean, it sounds as though, obviously we haven't seen the exact detail of this, but it sounds like this proposal from Sunak to make sure that UK does not further drift away from the European Union. I mean, that's very similar to what Theresa May was offering a couple of years ago. I still don't understand why nobody went for that. And here we are, the Assembly's collapsed, public services are in disarray, and here we are. So I hope sincerely that he does take it. I don't think it's without risk. And I think, as David has said, there's many people within the party who are going to oppose this. And if Kemi Badenoch is going to oppose this as well, God help us if she becomes Prime Minister. I think that does pose problems for Geoffrey Donaldson. But I mean, I think that the tale from this is that the DP should not put its trust, nobody in this country should put its trust in the Tories. Yeah,
we just bring in Aaron Edwards at this stage. Geoffrey Donaldson's clearly under pressure from one wing of his own party and within loyalism, or elements within loyalism. How do you think at this stage he's handling the situation, Aaron?
Well, I think he's come out fighting. He, as you said, he's swinging some punches, but whether he's landing them or not is another matter. I think that the impassioned speech that we heard in the House of Commons, and I did read the Hansard today to get the full gist of what he was trying to put across. You can read it in two ways. Either he's coming out on an offensive basis and he's swinging and he knows exactly what he's doing, or he's being defensive. And if he's being defensive, he certainly looks like a man under pressure, if you read it that way. And he's under pressure from within as well as from without. So he may be talking about TUV members in the dead of night, postering DUP MLA offices, but that anger is real. I mean, there are certain people in loyalism that are signing up to, trying to persuade the DUP not to go back into Stormont until they get what they want. And what Sir Geoffrey is basically saying is that they're a tiny minority. And he said that they're a tiny minority who don't want to go back into Stormont for other reasons, not those that he is dealing with himself as the leader of the DUP. So it is very interesting in terms of how he came out in the House of Commons with those remarks.
So you've got your ear to the ground as far as those loyalist communities are concerned. You talk to them for your research. You've written about their very particular worldview. What is your sense of how strongly they appear to be opposed to a deal, which they haven't seen the detail, of course, of at this stage? Do they have the numbers to derail the process, or do you think that Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, at the end of the day, is going to be able to bring enough people behind him to see this through, if that's the road he decides he wants to go down?
I think Sir Geoffrey knows he has to bring the greater number of people along with him, and some of the comments he's been making since before Christmas are very, very interesting indeed, and I think are very conciliatory towards nationalism as well as within unionism. But I think the biggest challenge, the strategic challenge for the DUP is apathy. I mean, if we're going to have an election anytime soon, he needs to energise the unionist base, and a lot of people within unionism, within loyalism, simply aren't interested. And there was an indication of that when he made those comments in the House, that one of his critics who threatened him, I believe that is with the PSNI now, but they hadn't voted. And I think so therefore it's a mixed picture. There are those loyalists who are very vocal and who will really oppose the DUP at any turn. And there are those who simply just want the public services back up and running. They want to see the health system kick in to gear and help their families. And those people we don't hear from an awful lot. So they may be a silent majority. We simply don't know. But I would say for sure it's a mixed picture.
David Graham, a lot's been said about this being Donaldson's Trimble moment. He even referenced that himself in the House of Commons yesterday. Do you get that sense? Is that what this boils down to?
Well, I think, Mark, his history will be kind to Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, in my opinion, because I think Geoffrey firmly wants Northern Ireland to work. He sees the direction of travel. He's astute. He's been around a long time. In fact, he'll not like me saying it. I think he's elected longer than I'm alive. And Geoffrey's been around every corner, and he has seen it firsthand. Going back to reference Lord Trimble, but I think there's a wider conversation where we're probably looking acutely at the impact on the DUP, the impact on unionism. But we actually have to think that no unionist can swallow the protocol or the framework, whatever you like to call it. I mean, this will have a fundamental change to the direction of travel within Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. And I think we can't underestimate where Aaron's entirely right to say people want public services back, people want the country to function. But I think we also have to remember that whether a green lane spray painted red, white and blue, it's still a lane, it's still a barrier to trade within the United Kingdom.
It's worth bearing in mind, of course, that the DUP pragmatically accepted the protocol for a few months and talked it up back in 2021. But then, and Sarah's already referenced this, people will remember the DUP line about blood red lines back in 2017. And the quote, remember the quote, "This is a battle of who blinks first and we've cut off our eyelids." That was a party source's line during Theresa May's time in office. That's how opposed the party was to any suggestion that Northern Ireland would be treated any differently thanks to Brexit. And now it looks like the DUP, after an awful lot of water's gone under the bridge and there's been a lot of pain for an awful lot of people, is about to accept a deal. It's not very different, as Sarah said, to Theresa May's deal.
Look, I think there's no doubt that I said a few days ago that there is no good option for unionism. And the DUP, as the leaders of unionism, self-appointed or appointed by the people, understand that. And I think that, you're almost trying to make the best out of what is a terrible situation. In fact, I would probably go as far to say I don't think Northern Ireland has been under such constitutional threat since its inception, 1921. In fact, probably since the Act of Union of 1800 has this island, or particularly this part of the island, faced such a challenge to its constitutional future.
So you've got if you were advising the DUP at the moment, you would have a real difficulty around getting votes because the party might take a decision which divides its base now on a constitutional position. And then not only do you have to fight on that front, but you also have to win over those voters who'd be disillusioned simply with the DUP's capacity or incapacity to navigate the Brexit process competently.
Well, I think the problem for unionism is that it's under clear potential to split and split emphatically. And Geoffrey was critical of Jim Allister in the TUV, but the reality of it is in Jim's defence, he's a one-man party in many ways, but Jim has held the feet to the fire, the DUP's feet to the fire probably for the last 10 to 15 years. And I think that we can't underestimate the impact that even though Jim mightn't bring a lot home with him in terms of more elected members, he could have a real impact on the likes of Lagan Valley come a general election.
Sarah, David's just referenced there the constitutional threat, which of course many people would point out is going to be decided one way or another in a border poll, and until that happens, nothing actually changes. How big an issue, though, is that likely to be for Sir Geoffrey Donaldson in the next election campaign? Whether that's another Assembly election, unlikely, but very likely a forthcoming general election within the next 12 months?
I'd imagine it'd probably be quite low down the priorities because obviously...
Jim Allister will want to make it a big issue though, won't he?
Jim Allister wants to make the protocol a massive issue, and I do think the protocol is going to be a massive issue if another election is called in the general election that's obviously coming down the road. But I think this is short-termism from unionism, and while I think obviously the protocol, unionist anger about it is perfectly understandable, I just think the tactics are wrong. But I think unionism needs to keep the eye on the bigger picture. It needs to keep the bigger eye on the state of the union, the changing demographics, the collapse in public services. Unionism, particularly some elements within unionism, they like the aesthetics of strong unionism, but the reality is that it is actually very weak.
Yeah, let me just bring another point to you. There's another element to that story in the Daily Telegraph, which is published online tonight and available tomorrow. As part of the process with the Assembly votes on whether to continue with the Windsor framework, there'll be a new measure, Sarah, whereby if a majority of Unionist MLAs vote against the framework, an independent report will be commissioned. That report, according to the Telegraph, will have to be commissioned and completed within 6 months, focusing on the UK internal market and Northern Ireland's constitutional status. The government response will also have to include discussing the findings with the EU. There's an awful lot of discussion in this point. So I want your analysis. Is this about assuring Unionists each step of the way as best it can within the framework, but not racing to change anything, because actually not really very much can be changed?
No, I think that's a nothing burger.
Is that a fig leaf?
I think that is. I mean, that's a lot of bureaucracy to put over a lot. That's getting a lot of lawyers involved for absolutely nothing, basically, I think. So, no, I don't think that's in it. That's a runner at all, really. I think the bigger picture is the Sunak offer. I think that's the one that is actually very, very significant, but that is like nothing. OK, that doesn't impress you. Aaron, do you think that line that I've just referred to from tomorrow's Daily Telegraph is likely to convince many within grassroots loyalism?
Well, for the reasons that I outlined earlier, I think the people who are implacably opposed to what the DUP's position at the minute under Sir Geoffrey will be opposed to whatever comes out of this deal. And as he repeated in the House of Commons, the deal is yet to be done. No one really knows what the details are. It's held very close, and one gets the impression it's held very, very close, even within that party officer group. I think that what Sir Geoffrey did say that's very significant here, and he will have his feet held to the fire by Jim Allister on this, and that is that he is of the view that the 7 tests will need to be judged alongside the deal. The deal will have to be looked at alongside the 7 tests and so on. And I think that the political context, will be looked at as well by those in loyalist grassroots, because I think we're seeing people try to move ahead of any indication of what that deal might be to spoil it. And I think that that's a real dangerous kind of threat, to Sir Geoffrey in a political sense that he will be aware of. And I think the time to move is now. And you could say that he had his Gordon Brown moment before Christmas by bottling the decision. Some have said that the decision, the deal was there, the DUP were ready to make the decision, but that they just did not. And I think that they didn't because they are aware, and Sir Geoffrey is aware of the kind of opposition that might manifest itself. So who knows what will come of this. But as I said, in something I wrote recently, a week is a long time in politics, and this has certainly been more than a week. And we've already had the deadline extended by another couple of weeks, so we could be waiting some time to find out the outcome here for Geoffrey Dawson and the DUP.
Yeah, it certainly feels like an awful lot longer than a week. It's been an awful lot longer than a week. I want to talk about those 7 tests. They maybe were a good idea in the short term because they rallied supporters to Sir Geoffrey's cause. But has he now painted himself into a corner so that those 7 tests actually are a major hook that he is going to struggle to get himself off?
Look, there's no doubt about that, Mark, and I think that Geoffrey is obviously going to be considering the 7 tests and the impact that has in the short term. But, Sarah's alluded to it as well. There's almost another challenge for the wider unionism now, which is essentially people who a generation ago would be nailed on to vote to remain part of the United Kingdom, particularly amongst the middle classes, who now, for several reasons, are now more inclined to at least consider United Ireland. So even though very few of them, even under Peter Robinson, very few of them voted DUP, there's almost a secondary election that's going on, and Geoffrey's acutely aware of that.
Yeah. How big an issue do you think that is, Sarah?
I think it's a massive issue. I think it's an issue that isn't... The focus of unionism is not on this issue, and the frustrating thing is people are aware of it, people know of it, but it's not. That's not the focus. That's not what the tactic is going forward. The collapse of Stormont, these 7 tests, that has further eroded people's trust in devolution and, further eroded people's trust in Northern Ireland. It has allowed nationalists and Republicans to say that this place doesn't work. Can you blame them? Can you actually blame them? It's
been a bit of a rollercoaster ride over the last 22, 23 months without Stormont. I just wonder if you think it's possible that public reaction, Sarah, to the collapse in public services, very prominent in the news agenda day after day, and the unprecedented level of public sector strike action we witnessed just a week ago could have moved the dial potentially in Sir Geoffrey's favour.
I don't see how it could move it in his favour, to be honest with you. I mean, the public are very, very angry about the state of the public services. I mean, I was up visiting a relative tonight in hospital. You know, you can see it everywhere. I don't see how it moves it at all in his direction. I think it potentially is going to fall back on him.
And the long-term consequences for the union, Aaron Edwards, is that something that is prominent in the minds of the people that you are talking to? I mean, and not just people within grassroots loyalism, within the Orange Order, within perhaps the DUP naysayers who don't fancy the look of this deal, and those within the TUV who would support Jim Allister.
Well, yes. I mean, this is a political and economic issue. I mean, it's one of the things that Sir Geoffrey has been talking about quite a lot. And I think that we've sort of concentrated on the trade barrier side of it and what this means for trade in the Seven Test. But really what we should have been looking at, what wider unionism should have been looking at, is what this means for the union going forward. We've already heard from Sarah there about the way that nationalists and Republicans have portrayed Northern Ireland, that it is not functioning, and the only solution, as far as they're concerned, is a united Ireland, whatever form that might take. We've also heard from David there about the crises and the within unionism, but mainly within the DUP, and the prospects of a split. And I think that people will become more apathetic towards that. It's always a very dangerous kind of set of circumstances. If people don't see their politicians as representing them, then we know where that goes in Northern Ireland, and sometimes it can go onto the streets. Now, I'm not saying that is a possibility. I'm just saying that people will be more apathetic. I mean, it's more likely to manifest itself in a fall in the voting turnout within unionist areas and loyalist areas. And that's the most likely outcome. And how you energise people from being despondent and disaffected is really a big problem for the DUP going forward. Whatever deal is done, if indeed it is something that we see this side of a general election.
Okay, David Graham, last one for you. You were a special advisor within the DUP. You've been a councillor as well in Belfast for the DUP. And I suppose you were involved doing that job whenever the party was maybe at its strongest ever, at its zenith. It seems to have fallen back a bit since then. It'll not be producing a First Minister at Stormont if and when Stormont comes back. Can you believe that it has arguably fallen so fast so far?
Well, I mean, I think Alex Keane wrote an article after the DUP party conference in 2016 that said that Arlene Foster was essentially the master, the mistress of all she observed, and essentially it was...
Doesn't really feel like that now.
No, I mean, there's a number of circumstances when you can blame RHI, you can blame Republicans manufactured angst over an Irish Language Act that ironically kept Sinn Féin out of government for a number of years, and actually they seem to have benefited from it. Yet unionism's boycott, or the DUP's boycott, I think, has damaged the party. So, I mean, certainly... Unionism has a lot of questions to answer and ask itself and answer them, because, as I said, without sounding like a doom merchant, I actually can't think of a time that unionism was ever under as much threat as it is now.
So it takes a steady hand at the tiller, and we'll see if that steady hand is Geoffrey Donaldson's, I suppose, in the days, maybe the weeks ahead. Thank you all very much indeed. Sarah and David, stay with me, because I'm going to come back to get your reaction to our next conversation, which is around both Stormont reform and attitudes towards potential constitutional change on the island of Ireland. One man who's done a lot of work in both areas is Dr. Jamie Pow from Queen's University, and he's with me now. Welcome to you, Jamie. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. I want to start by talking about the issue of Stormont reform. One of the things that you've highlighted is people's frustration at how easily one party can collapse or prevent the formation of the executive, which of course is very relevant to where we find ourselves at the moment. What did people that you've talked to as part of your research have to say about that?
Well, it's interesting that if we look at a survey we did with colleagues at Queen's immediately after the most recent Assembly election, we asked people, first of all, about their attitudes to the Good Friday Agreement as a basis for governing Northern Ireland. It's only about 5% who think that it's never been the best basis for governing Northern Ireland and should be abandoned. About a quarter think it's good to stay as it is. And then that leaves quite a sizable majority then in the middle who want to see some kind of reform. And for the reason you say, the frustration of potential collapse recurring is a key reason, it seems, why people want to see some kind of reform. When it comes to what that reform is, whenever we ask people about specific possibilities, it is quite difficult to get a common direction of travel. People do seem to be aware of the complexities and the trade-offs involved. And we do see, for example, quite a strong attachment to the principle of power sharing across the board, with the exception of TUV voters. But when it comes to the specific way in which it could operate, we don't see any clear results for any one particular set of arrangements.
Yeah, it's obvious, isn't it, I think, from your research, that members of the public simply do not want one party being able to pull the devolution project down in the way that Sinn Féin did a number of years ago and the DUP did almost 2 years ago. And that's where we find ourselves at the moment. The question is there reform that could be put in place that would secure a model where that couldn't happen? A workable alternative, do you think?
Well, each alternative, it has a number of consequences then. For example, if, for example, there was the pure voluntary coalition model, for example, that is common in other European democracies, where it's based on a simple majority of the parties in the Assembly, in this case, who could form a government themselves without any specific requirements. People do seem to be quite acutely aware that would likely alienate a sizable proportion of the public who maybe feel excluded from government in what is still a divided society. So there's a question mark there, I think, about the extent to which people are keen to abandon some of the checks that are currently in place in a power-sharing set of arrangements, which are quite finely balanced. But still, people are quite, I think, frustrated about how it works in practice when it comes to the current rules that we have. Yeah,
I mean, the issue is, of course, that the two main parties don't support reform, and they don't mind discussing it at some stage down the line, but they don't want to discuss it at the moment.
Yes, I mean, one alternative could be to select the First and Deputy First Minister according to de Hont, as the other ministerial portfolios are allocated, so roughly in proportion to their size in the Assembly, and then those who are eligible could still refuse to take those positions. So that could be one way of kind of loosening the rules slightly, whilst also kind of making for the inclusive possibility for parties to take up that opportunity in the first place. But then, of course, if you do have, say, all unionists or all nationalist parties refusing to be part of that, then that could raise questions about legitimacy and sustainability in the long term. So there are trade-offs clearly involved in moving away from the current arrangements.
OK, let's widen the discussion and move on to the constitutional change, because you're also involved in some ongoing research with ARANS, that's analysing and researching Ireland North and South. As things stand, what does your research suggest people's attitudes are to Irish unity?
Well, this is a project then that's hopefully going to be recurring every year to be able to track changes over time. In the most recent survey, both North and South, we find that in Northern Ireland, the level of support among those who say they would vote for staying in the UK is just over 50%. Those who say they would vote for Northern Ireland to unify with the Republic of Ireland is at 30%. And then the remainder in between either say they don't know or that they wouldn't vote. So those advocating the future of the Union will take comfort from there being quite a gap there and majority support for the Union. So the conditions for the Secretary of State calling a referendum aren't there according to this latest evidence. But on the flip side, those who are seeking Irish unification may take comfort from the fact that people, when they're asked about the issues that they prioritise, there has been a shift from the previous survey in 2022 in those who say that preparing or achieving Irish unification is a priority. So there are some shifts below the surface, as well as quite a lot of stability in top-line vote intentions.
And the picture is a different one when people are surveyed in the Republic.
Yes. So in the Republic, it's important to note then that a decisive majority, about 2/3, say that they would vote for unification. 16% say they would vote to oppose it, and then the remainder don't know or would not vote.
We discussed the idea of losers' consent on this programme before with your colleague, Professor Brendan O'Leary. Is there evidence, this is the interesting thing, of a shift in attitudes as far as that's concerned? Maybe you better just explain in a sentence or two what it is, and then tell us how you think it might be moving.
So this term losers' consent, it's really trying to tap into something that's really important in any democracy, whereby people will inevitably face decisions that they don't like. But the crucial test then is, will they still accept those decisions by virtue of how they have been reached by accepting the democratic process? So applied to this context, we're interested, especially, for example, in terms of people from a Catholic background, if the result is for Northern Ireland to stay in the UK after a referendum or referendums, would they accept the result? And we're especially keen on the flip side, if by the result of referendums there's a majority north and south to change, would Protestants, especially in Northern Ireland, accept or not the result? So here we see that there is a sizable minority, about 23% of Protestants, who say that they would find it almost impossible to accept the outcome of Irish unification if it was endorsed by referendums north and south. That's a sizable minority, but it is a decline actually from the first iteration in 2022 when it was at 32%. So going from about 1/3 to just under 1/4 of Protestants finding it almost impossible to accept. So there's some movement there. We think it may simply be because this debate is more prominent than it had been, say, 5-10 years ago, certainly. So even though there isn't a shift, certainly among Protestants, to support unification based on the evidence that we have, there may be a shift in them maybe thinking about it more, and then maybe thinking that it's something that they could live with, even if they don't actively want it.
It's fascinating stuff. We've only scratched the surface. That's all we've managed to do in the last 8 or 9 minutes. But if people want to find out more, the Aaron's research and your Queen's research, all available online for people to read in a bit more detail. Jamie Powell, thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you. Let's come back to David Graham and Sarah Crichton to hear what they make of what we've just heard. It is really interesting stuff. It says something about changing attitudes, I think, David, doesn't it? I wonder, again, do you think unionists listening to that will be nervous, concerned about the apparent direction of travel in a number of key areas, potentially?
Well, I think unionists should be concerned. I think that, when you look at constituencies, even like South Belfast, where I live, where 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't long where Martin Smith had a majority where almost he had more votes than everyone else put together. You would have never thought that Sinn Féin in somewhere like South Belfast would have got 6,000 votes at a general election. You can see now with Claire Hanna's seismic victory in 2019 that if you were being stereotypical, that would suggest that there are now more people, well, certainly more people of nationalist background. Let's assume that they're from a Catholic background as well, or at least some of them, or the majority of them will be. And I think that reflects the census, doesn't it? Where now, for the first time in Northern Ireland's history, Protestants are not the main religious designation within Northern Ireland. So, as far as I'm concerned, unionism has a lot of work to do to try to increase those middle class, particularly Catholic voters who at a time were soft unionists, small U unionists.
Yeah, what's fascinating about that is the argument that sometimes the purest approach to unionism isn't necessarily the sensible way forward. This is the argument, isn't it? That if you can loosen that worldview as far as unionism is concerned, that's actually potentially the better way of securing the union in the long term. Pragmatic unionism is what that all boils down to. I mean, is there an argument? Is there validity in that argument in your
Yes,
view?
absolutely. I think unionism has historically built its entire identity around Protestantism, Protestant identity and the British identity, and you can't keep hold of that if you want to try to appeal to people across the board to be more transfer friendly. People are made of multitudes in this country, and you can't just stick to one or the other. And I think there are a lot of people within, well, okay, maybe not a lot of people, but I think there are a significant number of people within unionism I think are a bit blind, I think, are just deluded to the fact they think Irish unity will not happen, and they honestly just believe that things are as they were about 40 years ago.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason we're discussing this, David, I suppose, and we discuss it so often in this programme, is because this is where the jeopardy is in the political landscape in Northern Ireland at the moment. Sometimes people say you spend so much time talking about unionism and loyalism and what's happening there to the detriment of nationalism and republicanism and others. But the reality is that there is a fork in the road as far as unionism is concerned at the moment, and unionists and everybody else should be thinking about choices that are being made or perhaps about to be made, because that will shape the future of the politics in this place for many years to come. That's why it's so important.
Look, I think there's no doubt where, when you consider the opposition to Home Rule or Rome Rule, as it was coined back 100 and something years ago, the world has become more secular. Sarah's entirely right to say, people who, maybe their parents, grandparents in particular, went to church. Those people are much more secular now. So therefore, the idea, and I say this as a member of the Loyal Orders, the idea of linking and rolling the whole PUL community up in we all go to the 12th of July. The reality of it is, it won't be people on the 12th that march on the 12th of July that'll win or lose the union. It'll be people who are probably in Donegal or Spain, who you need those votes to balance out and get you across the line.
And that's the very point that Jeffrey Donaldson made in the House of Commons yesterday, when he said he talked to an individual who accused him of not doing enough to preserve the union and, engaging in some kind of process of sellout. And then he says that individual didn't even vote.
Yeah, and I do think there's a point I think needs to be made. I think if a section of society in Northern Ireland is apathetic and disillusioned, if a section of society in Northern Ireland is quite happy for Stormont Bago because they think they don't have nothing to lose, I think that speaks to 25 years of failure process. I think there are communities in Northern Ireland that have been left behind and abandoned and probably feel not politically represented. I think that's very, very depressing. And I think it's, unionism does need to appeal to lots of different type of voters, but there are also other people in our society as well that we need to reach out to too. But yes, unionism needs to make itself more friendly across the board.
But can you make that argument, do you think? In all honesty, David, if you're saying that people don't feel they're being represented, they've been left behind, if they are in big numbers not turning out to vote?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's very easy to demonise the loyalist community and say, ultimately, that they have been left behind. Sarah's entirely right. I think when you compare it to the other side of the peace wall and the benefit I think that the peace process has had, the Belfast Agreement and everything that's gone from there, that has benefited, in my view, it has benefited the CNR community more so. Okay. And I think part of that reason is because there is not enough community infrastructure in the Protestant community anymore.
OK, need to leave it there, folks. We're out of time. Thank you both very much indeed. Fascinating conversation. By the way, we've discussed all of these issues, in particular what I was talking to Jamie Pow about before, with a range of voices, and we'll be hearing other perspectives on all of those issues in the weeks and months ahead. But that's all we've got time for tonight. I'll be back at the weekend with Sunday Politics, when we'll have the latest in our series, The State We're In, including the views of this worker from a children's cancer charity.
We're finding that our young people in particular and families are struggling with deciding whether they can afford to put food on the table or make it to their appointment to have their treatment.
That's at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning here on BBC One. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Good night.